Hello. Hopefully the recording is working. Um, Hi, my name is Kyle. I don't really make videos or do anything like that, and I don't plan to. So this is kind of out of character for me. I don't think I've even really voluntarily streamed something or put a video of myself online for like 8 years or something. It's just not really my style. Um, I don't know. I'm just not a video guy. Um, so I figured why not just do this random thing that I felt like doing. Did that thing just come up, that Steam thing in the corner? It might not have. Anyway, someone's playing Atlas there. I gave it away. Um, I don't know why I saw this Homestuck character tier list. Um, And since I'm recording my voice and posting something on the internet, which I haven't done in like 8 years, why not have it be something else I did 8 years ago, which was be extremely into the webcomic Homestuck. Um, this credit where credit is due. This is inspired by a podcast called Live, Laugh, Stuck that just did an episode using this tier list. So that's where I'm stealing the idea from. Although I had wanted to do something like this for a while, just because sometimes I think about Homestuck. Um, so yeah, go listen to Live, Laugh, Stuck wherever you get your podcasts, I guess. And yeah, speaking of podcasts, I have not reread Homestuck really. I've never reread it. It's in its entirety, from start to finish. I just read it as it was happening to the end. So most of my memories are pretty hazy, and most of my memories are courtesy of another podcast called Homestuck Made This World on Range Touch. Most of what I remember is kind of filtered through their read through of it and their sort of interpretation of it. So if I get something wrong, don't get mad at me and don't get mad at them. I deleted some rows on this thing. I feel like we didn't need S plus, kind of silly, and having like a E F G H is a little too much. I'm gonna rename H. Is this how you rename stuff? Okay. Remove from the comic, please, is going to be the bottom tier you can get, and then I'm gonna make sure I have a row in here for I don't care. Like I just don't. I don't have an opinion. All right, let's rank these Homestuck characters. Um, I guess some context. I started reading Homestuck when Act 4 ended. The animation Descend, that was the first thing I ever saw. I watched Descend. I followed someone who was on the art team. I saw a little bit of fan art and I was like, oh, this thing looks cool. Got into it, very much interested in that sort of like Act 4 era. Started binge reading it. And then by the time I was caught up binge reading it, it was like halfway through Hive Bent. So very into like Hive Bent as well. So just so everybody knows where I'm coming from, I don't know if I count as an old head or a fucking new person, but I'm somewhere kind of in the middle. So that is definitely going to influence my opinion on a lot of this. Man, I hope this is still recording. Okay, so John, I mean he's S tier. I mean, I don't. I was gonna pretend to not put him in S tier. I really like John. I think he's a cool protagonist. He was definitely one of my favorite characters while I was reading it. Oh yeah, I guess I should also say in terms of like what my criteria is, it's just like, do I like their presence in the comic? Yes or no? Do I think their design is cool? Do I think they're funny or interesting? My criteria is definitely not through the lens of like fandom versions of the character. I know like I'm sure by this point, like the fandom version of John is probably very different from like what was actually on the page, and I'm sure that's true for every character, just from like all the comics people making stuff. I don't really read much of that stuff or like fan fiction. I don't think I've ever read a Homestuck fan fiction, but for some weird reason, I've written a short one. I don't know. So yeah, this is mostly just my memories of like the comic itself. Um, and stuff like that. Not like, oh, the fandom personifies Solix as this. Like, I don't know that stuff. Anyway, John's cool. I think he's funny. I think it's a good like protagonist character. Um, I think he kind of like walks up to the line of the sort of like generic anime protagonist, the sort of problem where like the protagonist of the anime is kind of like the least interesting character and everyone else in the anime is more interesting. He at worst he like walks up to that line, but I think um he's like kind of a weird little dude. And that's funny. Rose, S tier. We're starting strong and then it's all gonna go downhill. Yeah, Rose is cool. Feel like I feel like everybody knows somebody like this, or maybe you were the person that was like this. I think this is a very like relatable character in terms of like young teenager on the internet who is like um, types of perfect grammar and is like, I'm the smart one. Not in like in that sense, but almost just like very introspective and psychological and like going to use that as the framework for how she talks to people, even when it's like a little over the top and like silly when you think about it. Like, okay, we're like 13-year-olds on like AOL and we're psychoanalyzing each other. It's kind of ridiculous, but I think that is what makes her so cool. Um, there's a lot of characters where I feel like after Act Five, they get like less interesting, and I think that's definitely the case with Rose for me. I definitely feel like sort of like Act Three, Act Four was kind of peak Rose era. Um, but yeah, I think she's very funny too, which is nice, and she's funny in a way that's different from how other characters like John are funny. Dave, I mean, if I really wanted to seem uh, like some sort of connoisseur that is above the filthy masses, I would not put him in S. But like at the end of the day, this is kind of the opposite thing, where I think the character got better over time. I think he's probably one of the few characters where that's true for me. If he had just stayed like sort of Act One, Act Two type Dave for the entire runtime, I think that would be obnoxious. And I think as readers like me, like I was a teenager when I started reading it, so I was like a little bit older than the characters. It would be so cringe to go back if that was how the character had stayed. It'd be like, oh my god, I can't believe I used to like Dave. Um, but I think Hussey was wise enough to have like the whole point of Dave be like that he kind of evolves as the comic evolves and as the internet kind of evolves, and probably Hussey's own beliefs and opinions start to like slightly change. And I feel like that feeling of the character kind of growing with you is really nice. He kind of becomes this whole like irony bro, but then sort of like an examination of the sort of like toxically masculine internet bro. And I think that ends in a really good place. So, I mean, I thought he was funny in the beginning at the time, and then I still think he's pretty funny now, usually. And I think he went through a good sort of natural change that I think a lot of us reading it were also going through, which was cool. Now, for symmetry's sake, I would feel best to put Jade here with all her friends, but I think I'm gonna have to knock her some points. Unfortunately, it's not her fault; it's Hussey's fault. She's just like not. The problem used to be that she wasn't in the comic enough. I feel like in like Act Five, it was just like Act Four, Act Five is like what happened to Jade? Like, is she still in this thing? And then I feel like in the long run, it's not really like a screen time issue. It is just like not having interesting things to do anymore issue, not being able to like ping pong off of other characters in like an interesting combination. I feel like if you were quote unquote in the reader base, the fan base or whatever at the time, Act Five or something like you could on the wiki you could like see every conversation that every character's had with everybody else, and it's like was like why is Jade only talk to like she only talks to like John and John Carcat and Dave, as like she's only like spoken to Rose like twice. Like it was very strange. Um, I feel like that was kind of resolved by the end, but I can't like erase those feelings of like, oh, why was she not like more integrated with the other characters? Um, and then it feels like she had to get sort of like sidelined because she was like overpowered at the end. And it's like, oh, well, if we let her stay in the story, she'd be able to resolve everything really fast. So we have to sort of write her out for various reasons temporarily. So that was a bummer. I really like her god tier design. It's probably my favorite. I feel like that was like Galaxy Brain with like dog ears and the ruby slippers and stuff. I mean, like that was peak Homestuck when when everyone got weird pajamas. I'm gonna do the trolls first, just to kind of like walk through things sort of in order, I guess, and then I'll come back to the Alpha Kids. God, I hope this is still recording. It says it is. I don't know how to do this stuff, man. I'm using Zoom. I don't even know like how big the file's gonna be at the end. Um, Aradia. I don't know, man. I don't know. See, like what the thing with a lot of these characters is that I do think people who are really invested in the fandom and have like all of these like fan comics and fanfics under their belt, like they have a totally different version of the character than what I remember in a way that might be like more interesting. But for me, Aradia is like a solid, I don't know, B, no, C. I just don't think about her a lot. She is cool. Like it's not like I don't like her. It's not like I don't care. It's not like I want her like not in the comic. She's fine. You know, she goes through like kind of different phases. She's dead, and then she's a robot. She's a ghost. She's god tier. She's alive. She's in a flashback. And I appreciate that she like talks differently in those different forms. I feel like maybe actually the dead version of her is more interesting. I don't know if like the dead version of her is like a care. I mean, am I really going to say that the dead version of Aradia is more interesting than the alive version? I don't want to say it, but I don't know. At least she like talks different. All right, let's keep going, I guess. Tavros. I feel like Tavros is a solid B for me. Um, this is not like again, this is not the criteria. Is not like who would I want to be friends with or anything. This is just like, do I think they're interesting and entertaining in the comic? And I think Tavros is like a necessary ingredient. He's like whatever TV tropes calls it, the freaking whoopee, the I don't know, the punching bag, the squid from Rocket Power. He's like the male character that everyone makes fun of, and he's like a total loser, and we're supposed to feel bad like he's a little puppy dog. I think that totally works. I mean, if anything, I think the comic kind of like repeats that too often. Like why Jake English is like the same thing, and in similar ways. I don't know why we did it again, but Tavros was cool, a good like foil bouncing off of Vriska, kind of like polar opposites, sort of, which was nice. The way he tries to troll other characters like Dave and Jade is funny because it's like, wow, you're really bad at this. Anyway, Solix, I don't know. It's kind of like a Aradia. I don't really think about you. I'm sorry. I know there's probably like a huge fandom. But in my fuzzy memory of the whole thing, I was not like going back and like rereading Solix conversations a lot. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing the names the way that other people pronounce them. So sorry if that annoys you. Yeah, I mean, like he's funny. He just like has like I don't want to say he has no purpose. I'm sure that's like you could prove that wrong. Um, but I don't know. He just didn't do it for me. Um, Maybe this is a good time to say that like okay, so I caught up on the comic while like High Event was starting, right? So I'm like in it with everybody else. Like we don't know who these characters are. We're like learning them all for the first time. We're going through this, Alternia story for the first time. So I feel like I was getting my hopes up and like my sort of like speculation and my hype was like going in a certain direction of what I thought Hive Bet was going to be, and then it ended up being like a totally different thing. And now that the comic is over and all of that is over, and you can like look back on it, I feel like it is totally different than what I thought it was going to be. I definitely thought it was going to be like, they were setting up like the red team, the blue team. I really thought it was going to be like a conflict, like these characters against these characters, and these characters are villains, and these characters are heroes, and these are going to be like Karkat and his friends like showing up like these assholes like Equius and Eridan and stuff like that. And then like it didn't end up being about that at all. Obviously they ended up being on the same team, and then they had to like learn to be friends and like tolerate each other. So I really thought it was going to be this like anti-hierarchy, anti-bloodline story of like Karkat rising up and like power friendship and this, and like it sort of was that, but like nothing that I thought was going to matter ended up mattering. And I think I don't know, in the imaginary version of Hyvent that I made up in my head, I think I would like Solix and Aradia more, but just like it just didn't. It like swerved because like obviously Homestuck was all about swerving. It swerved into like a totally different direction. I mean, this is no hesitation. Um, Karkat S. He's probably my favorite character overall. Pretty much from like the moment he was introduced in like Act Four or whatever, even when we like didn't know what he looked like. I really liked him. Liked him in Act Four. Liked him in Act Five. Liked him in Act Five, Act Two. I liked him in everything past that. Even as he changed, as sort of like writing him changed, and he became like a little bit more uh became more emo, then became more of like a joke character. Like I've liked all kind of versions of him. I think he's funny. I think he's relatable. I think he bounces off the characters in a really funny way. The way he talks to John, the way he talks to Dave, like he for me, he's the secret sauce of this whole thing. Nepeta, you're I probably think about you as much as the people in the C tier, but I think you're funny and like a cute idea for a character, so I'm gonna put you in the B tier. Um, I like that she's like a cat girl who likes to draw on her tablet and ship her real friends and all this different stuff. Cat role play. I think it's really fun. Another character who didn't really get to like do much, which was sad. I think everyone, probably has like favorite characters that they wish like got to do more. These pretzels are making me thirsty. Um, but yeah, I don't know. She's fine. Like, yeah, she's fun. And everyone, it's like that. Everyone from Homestuck was sort of like, oh, this was like a type of person on the internet, and everybody knew a Nepeta, or you were the Nepeta. Like another like classic. You meet the character, you're like, I know exactly who this is. She's gonna ping pong off the characters in an interesting way. Love it. Kanaya. Um, I'm gonna put her in the B. I don't know who's gonna go in the A tier at this point, but I'm gonna put her in the B. I really like her. I think you have to like maybe this is just me talking, but I feel like it takes a little bit longer to kind of get her sense of humor and like get who she is as a person. It's not as obvious and fast as like a Karkat or a Nepeta. Like she's more three-dimensional, which is a good thing, but it's also kind of a bad thing because it takes longer to learn about a three-dimensional character than it does to like see a one-dimensional or two-dimensional character and be like, oh, I know your shtick. I mean, she had her shtick, but it just kind of like maybe it just took. I should just speak for myself. It took me a long time to fully understand who Kanaya was, and she's cool. Um, again, like kind of gets sidelined, but I guess most characters kind of get sidelined. Um, she was definitely like I always felt like if they were ever going to like trim down the cast of trolls, I'm like you got to keep Kanaya. That has to be like if you were like trim it down to just like six, she's got to be in the six. But she's cool. Vampire, lesbian, the lipstick, the chainsaw. I feel like the glowing white skin was stupid from like a design standpoint. I understand it was a Twilight joke, but maybe that's why also it wasn't like really that funny. I don't know. Like she looked better before. I don't think she needed like paper white skin or anything. Whatever. Maybe we just found the perfect A tier character, Terezi. And maybe I'll reorder these at the end. Yeah, Terezi's cool. She's a Libra, just like me, so I identified with that. I bought the T-shirt. So I was wearing a Terezi t-shirt. You know how that is. Yeah, I mean, she was like just like Karkat, liked her even before High Vent started. I thought she was really funny. I thought she was really cool. Um, Probably one of those characters where I feel like from Act Six onward became less interesting to me. Um, I like the fact that she like regrets getting her eyes healed and hides it and all that stuff. Like that's interesting. But I feel like there's a lot of back and forth about her like having any involvement with the story, having like agency over what's going on in her life, and maybe that's the point. But yeah, she's funny. I don't know. She has like Invader Zim vibes, if that makes sense. Um, like Hot Topic after Hot Topic sort of started straying from its path, but in a fun way. I like the dragon plushies. I don't know. She's cool. Um, and you know what? I'll give her points for. I'll give her points. Her and Karkat for not going God tier. I think I kind of when the comic was going on and we learned about God tier, I always hoped that not all the characters would go God tier because I thought that was kind of boring. I would have been totally fine if it was just John and Jade, honestly, and like nobody else. So again, like a character to the end, having some sort of use, having some sort of relevance, being able to use like powers without being god tier, I thought that was cool. And I guess also like I don't know, should I talk about shipping? I'm not really. I'm one of those people who's like quote unquote not into shipping, but it's like totally a lie or whatever. Because I'm just like a man who's in denial. Um, it was because I was one of those people that was more into like canonically implied romance and stories as opposed to like speculating about fun combinations. That doesn't make it right or make me like cooler. That was just my thought at the time. I was like, oh, I don't like the crack ships or random pairings or whatever. I was just more interested in like, oh, Karkat and Terezi have a thing, and Terezi and Dave have a thing. Like, I was that kind of reader. And I'm trying to grow out of that sort of like bias of like, oh, it has to be canonically implied because I think that now at this point, I think that's like pointless. It doesn't matter. Um, but anyway, there she, flirts with Karkat, flirts with Dave, all this different stuff. Slightly ends up with Briska. Like I think it's interesting, and I think it's interesting that the time travel retcon plot at the end was had that sort of like, oh, you don't need him thing that kind of like recontextualized my hype of hoping at first that Karkat and Terezi would end up together, and then it's like by the time you finish the comic, it's like, oh, like Karkat and Dave are so much more perfect for each other. Um, and the Terezi Vriska stuff starts to make like more sense over time. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, I guess. Also, it took me a while to realize like, oh, Dave flirted with Trezzy and Karkat flirted with Trezzy, and then Dave and Karkat end up together. I thought that was kind of interesting. Vriska. I think if Homestuck ever had like a mascot aside from John, I feel like Karkat's the mascot, but I feel like Vriska is kind of like the heart and soul of the second half of the comic, for better or worse. It's either like you're either interested in Vriska stuff or you're not. And if you're not, the second half of the comic is going to be like torture for you. I like Vriska. Again, this is not criteria of like, did she do no wrong? Is she evil? Is she good? Or do I want to be friends with her or anything? Just like, is she an interesting character? I think she's a super interesting character. I thought she was interesting pretty much from the jump. And then like as the podcast that I referred to, Homestuck made this world, as they often talk about, like the point of Riska existing is to be this like wedge character that like is meant to be fuel for the audience to argue with each other and to feel conflicted. It's almost like a thought experiment of like how bad can you make a character and then redeem them if you're doing like a sort of Zuko sort of type thing, like taking that trope and then like stretching it to its most ridiculous ends of like I am going to try to make the audience as angry as possible at this character and then I'm going to try to come up with justifications for her behavior and excuses and try to make her like an anti-hero that you could root for, and then just you have to duke it out with other fans, or you have to like duke it out in your own mind about whether you forgive her or not. I thought that was like an interesting idea. It's kind of childish on Hussey's part, if I'm being honest, but like doesn't mean it's not interesting. Even though it's like kind of immature, it was still kind of like an interesting idea for a character. Try to like make a character as likable and unlikable at the same time. I thought that was a cool idea. Here's where I don't. Pretty much the rest of this list, I was like, now what is there to say? Equius, I don't know, man. I don't know. Again, this is not who I want to be friends with, right? Um, I'll stick him in B just for being slightly funnier than Aradia Sulks. So, like I said before, in my sort of head canon of where I thought High Bent was going, I definitely thought like Equius was the villain of it, and that it was going to be a big like anti-bullying PSA, or like because it's hard to be like. I feel like there's two types of stories, or two types of stories. There's stories where every character is meant to have the potential to be your favorite character. And then there's stories where that's not true. So it's like you read a book for English class in high school or middle school, like those books are these stories where you're not supposed to like every character and they're not supposed to be your fave Blorbo. Like you're not supposed to have your favorite Blorbo in To Kill a Mockingbird or 1984. Like that's not the point of that cast of characters. The point of that cast of characters is to tell a story. But when you watch Avatar The Last Airbender or you play Fire Emblem, like that cast of characters is designed so that each person could be somebody's favorite, right? And the thing that fascinates me and is kind of cringeworthy about Homestuck is that whether it wants to or not, it presents this cast of colorful, silly characters where any of them, it seems like the point is that any of them could be your favorite, that you defend and stand and get the T-shirt with them on, like. But then, like some of the characters are just like so heinous in a way that is not like the Joker from Batman evil, but just like, oh, this kid's racist. Like, hey, this is my favorite character. Sorry, they're racist. Like, that's not. It's not saying that you can't like that character, but it's like the way that it's presented as like pick your favorite Pokemon almost. Like, it's not. It creates these weird uneven parts. Where like the 12 trolls, I don't feel like they're all equally distributed as like equally likely to be someone's favorite character, because you have characters like Equius and Eridan who are just like gross and like sometimes in a fun way, but sometimes super not in a fun way. And I think this is where fan work and fandom and fan fiction can kind of like redeem a lot of this by writing new stories about them or like twisting them in a different way or showing a funnier side of them. Anyway, I mean, I think there's a lot about Hego's that is funny. He is like explicitly introduced as like he's a fascist, like he's the fascist guy in the group who everyone thinks is annoying. So I've always had like conflicted feelings about that part of it. Um, but then the comic kind of later like makes a mockery of it and kind of makes him like a joke to be laughed at. So I think that's also kind of like salvages the idea of this character being a main character. Um, yeah, I don't know what else I want to say about that, but like I just feel like the comic at the end of the day, when the comic ends, everyone is kind of represented sort of equally as like it was like a big group of ragtag heroes, and any of them could be your favorite. But that when High Bent started, I definitely did not feel that way. I was just like, oh, this guy is evil and he's funny, and I want to see him get like knocked down a peg. But you know, whatever. I'm saying too much. Whatever. Who cares? Gamzee, I don't know. Should I just say I don't know before every character? He's interesting. Definitely changes a lot from the first half to the second half. Um, I'll give him the B just because he's funny. Um, I don't have any like strong opinions on whether I liked him more before he sort of like breaks down and murders people or not. I mean, he definitely was like funnier before, and I think a lot of the murder rampage pacing wise just felt like kind of a waste of time and um characters were acting in strange ways during that little arc that I found kind of annoying. And then I feel like Gamzee in Act 6, I don't even care anymore. Like that I don't care. Um like then I lose interest, and that's why he maybe is even like a C tier. But I'll keep him in the B because he's like silly clown man. See now, Aridin, everything I just said about Equius, like doubly true for Aridin. Um, I'm gonna put him in the D. It's not removed from this comic, please. Um, but he's just not funny or interesting enough to justify being in the cast, in my opinion. I don't know why I'm clarifying that this is all in my opinion. I know there's like Aridin big fans out there. That's totally fine. But yeah, he like I feel like he has less screen time than Equius and less interesting than Vriska. Like you could say he's like part of the villains, but like doesn't do interesting villain stuff for the most part. The design is cool, that's fine. Magic wand, science wand, in denial about magic, that's all whatever. The fact that he's like an F boy, like total freaking loser, like creep towards girls, I think is an interesting thing to like portray. And I think like in some ways, I think for teenagers reading it, like an important character to have there as a bad example, so that as you grow up, you could be like, well, I shouldn't act like him. Like that. That's also kind of fun. And I know like the fandom has had like a field day with him and like the fan art and comics and stuff like. So that's totally fine. But I don't like super engage with that. So I feel like he just doesn't. You know what? Honestly, I'll give him the C. I'll give him the C because there's going to be other people that go in the D later. Honestly, yeah, he's whatever. Um, talk about a character who's like actually written out of the story. You know, he has nothing to do with the story from Act 6 onward. And then for Fairy, maybe I'll stop the video here. It's like a part one because I'm scared that the recording will like break. But this is hard. I mean, like she's barely in it. Let's be real. I remember when she like came out or like came into the story, I was kind of like, I don't understand how she's different from Jade at first. I feel like I sort of understand how they're different now, how they act different and stuff, but like at first it felt like very redundant. It felt like she was like the Jade of this group. Jade, if she was like a rich like royal. There's cool parts about Feferi, but like she I will throw in the D because there just is not enough interesting stuff that justifies her being in the comic as it is. Again, I'm sure the fandom, the fan comics or whatever, like I'm sure that's all great, but like in the comic as it is, totally forgettable, has nothing to do with anything else that happens. I'm sorry if Fairy's your favorite character. That's totally fine if she's your favorite character, but just like I feel nothing. Um, and I guess I'm gonna stop this video here for now, but I am gonna do the rest. So if you've watched this far, congratulations and thank you.